The Lord saw that humanity had become thoroughly evil on the earth, and that every idea in their minds thought up was completely evil. The Lord regretted making human beings on the earth, and he was heartbroken.
I will wipe off the land, the human race that I have created, from human beings to livestock to the crawling things to the birds in the skies, because I regret I ever made them.
But as for Noah, the Lord approved of him. In his generation, Noah was a moral and exemplary man. He walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. God spoke to him.
The end has come for all creatures, since they have filled the earth with violence. I am now about to destroy them along with the earth. So make a wooden ark. Everything on earth is about to take its last breath, but I will set up my covenant with you. Go into the ark with your whole household. From every clean animal, take 7 pairs, a male and his mate. And from every unclean animal, take 1 pair, a male and his mate. And from the birds in the sky as well. Take 7 pairs, male and female, so that their offspring will survive throughout the earth. In 7 days from now, I will send rain from the earth for 40 days and 40 nights.
Noah did everything the Lord commanded him. On the day, all the springs of the deep sea erupted, and the windows in the skies opened. The waters rose and spread out over the earth. The ark floated on the surface of the waters. The waters rose even higher over the earth. They covered all of the highest mountains under the sky. Everything on dry land with life's breath in its nostrils died. Only Noah and those with him in the ark were left. God remembered Noah, all those alive, and all the animals with him in the ark. And God sent a wind over the earth so that the waters receded. The springs of the deep sea and the sky closed up, and the ark came to rest on the Ararat Mountains.
Go out of the ark, you and your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you all the animals of every kind.
Noah built an altar to the Lord and placed entirely burned offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the pleasing scent, and the Lord thought to himself, I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. God blessed Noah and his sons.
Be fertile, multiply, and fill the earth. All the birds in the skies, everything crawling on the ground, and all the sea's fish are in your power. Everything that lives and moves will be your food, just as I have gave you the green grasses. I now give you everything. However, you must not eat meat with its life, its blood in it. I will surely demand your blood for a human life. For every little living thing, I will demand it. Whoever sheds human blood, by a human his blood will be shed. For in the divine image God made human beings.
God said to Noah and to his sons with him,
I am now setting up my covenant with you, with your descendants, and with every living being leaving the ark with you. I will set up my covenant with you so that never again will all life be cut off by flood waters. This is the symbol of the covenant that I am drawing up between me and you and every living thing with you, on behalf of every future generation. I have placed my bow in the clouds. It will be the symbol of the covenant between me and the earth. The bow will be in the clouds, and upon seeing it, I will remember the enduring covenant between God and every living thing of all the earth's creatures.
The story I think most everybody's heard in some form or fashion sometime in your lives. This story of Noah and the flood. They've made a couple of movies. If you've gone on the tour of Universal Studios, you've gotten to go through flood waters that move away. When we move to the Moses story, there's all kinds of representations that there are of this story. I'm going to tell you a different story. I worked in the film business for about 10 years, and one time I did a job. It was a Shania Twain live concert that we were filming. We were making a DVD and showing it live and a whole bunch of junk. And so we worked 2 16-hour days in prep, and then the day of the concert was a 21-hour day. And then after a 4-hour break, me and my friend Steve Dewar are back there to take cameramen to the airport. I was driving the 15-foot cube truck that I was known for being able to pack full of things that other people weren't able to get as much in. So that was the kind of highly exciting job I did, you know, or like having a broom and following an elephant in the circus. You know, not very exciting to do, but the person who has to go after that elephant's pretty excited you were there. So we had shot at Reunion Arena. We're at the Reunion Tower that's right next door. That's where all the production people were staying. And we've got to the first thing we've got to do is take the cameramen to the airport and drop them off with their gear. So Steve says, you go ahead since the truck's slower, and since we're having to wait for the valets, since they're being slow about bringing down the vehicle, when it gets here, I'll put the cameraman in it and we'll meet you at the airport. Sounds good. I head to the airport, get there, still hadn't caught up with me, which surprised me. I'm sitting there a few minutes and he pulls up and they start getting out of a white Suburban. And I thought we had white minivans on this job, but I'm not sure. I hadn't been driving anything but a cube truck, so we unload the cameramen, we unload their camera equipment from the truck. They go to get on their flight. We decide where we're going to go have breakfast, and Steve gets in the Suburban and pulls away, and I see a USA Gymnastics bumper sticker on the back of the Suburban, and I think, I don't think that's a rental car. So I called the production coordinator and said, do we have a Suburban on this job? And she said, nope, we have white minivans. I said, well, Steve just dropped the cameraman off in a Suburban. Will you call the hotel and tell them we're bringing it back as quick as we can? So I catch Steve out at the toll booths and pulls over. And I say, Steve, you're in somebody's personal vehicle. This is not a production vehicle. He goes, this is the one the valet brought me. I said, it's not the one. He goes, it's got to be the one. It's got a Shania Twain CD going in it. I said, Steve, hotel's next door to the concert. There were a lot of Shania Twain CDs in people's cars. So somebody had taught me once how to break the regulator on a cube truck in case you needed it to go faster than they want you to go when you rent one. So I did that, and I led the way, and Steve followed, and we went very fast back to Reunion Tower. Steve had the windows down, which I didn't quite understand, but we get back. I thought maybe he was trying to stay awake, but I was going fast enough. I was pretty sure he'd stay awake at that speed. We get back, and I jump out of the truck, and I see the head valet. And so I go over to him, and he's obviously with the father of this family whose Suburban it is. And I start trying to explain it. And the head valet is about a head taller than me, which is not a surprise. And he doesn't like the fact that the valets are sounding like they did something wrong. So he jumps in and starts jumping all over my case. Well, Steve's gotten here by then, and Steve is also a head taller than me, and the sweetest person in the world. Until that day, I don't know a single person who had ever seen Steve speak to somebody in anger. Ever. And his best friend in college, they did a film together. His best friend stole it, went to LA, and got himself into the film business. Became a director in the film business, and Steve would explain the reasons why it was probably best that that happened to you. I mean, sweetest guy. But he did not like seeing that guy getting on to me. So he stepped in, and his full Boston accent came out, and he's nose to nose with this valet, and they're going at it, and the production manager walks up, and he's from New York, and he's like, all right, says, Steve, Derek, I'll take care of this. you guys have a whole bunch of deliveries left to make. Go get in the truck, go deliver the stuff. We go out delivering the stuff, and we get a call that we're going to have to go back for a meeting at the hotel. We're going to gather everybody together and figure this thing out. So then Steve says, I think I'm going to jail. I said, Steve, it was an honest mistake, and the valet gave you the wrong vehicle. It's not your fault they gave you the wrong vehicle. He goes, no, the cameraman smoked a joint on the way to the airport. That's why the windows were down on the way back. He's trying to air the marijuana out of the Suburban. And he's convinced they probably dropped another one somewhere in the vehicle, and he's going to get there, and the police are going to be there, and he's going to have a record for both Grand Theft Auto and possession of marijuana, and he's building this case in his head, and I'm trying to keep him calm. And we get back to the hotel, and we go into this meeting, and the hotel manager is trying to tell us everything that we've done wrong, and the head valet's on us. But the valet who actually gave him the vehicle, for some reason, couldn't be at the meeting. And they've built this story about Steve, about how he has taken that valet and thrown him to the ground and said, I'll just take this one, and jumped in the Suburban and driven away. And Steve says, could you let your valet know next time somebody's stealing a vehicle, you probably shouldn't go ahead and load their luggage for them after they take possession of the vehicle? Because that really doesn't send a message that somebody's taken the wrong car. So they're trying to figure that out, and the production manager from New York starts explaining to them how much money he has spent at that hotel that week on the 48 rooms he's paid for, 4 of which nobody ever entered, and suddenly they were just ready to let us go and take the loss of that family's stay on themselves. So about a year and a half later, we're on a film set, and this story has become a story in the business. And Steve and I are on a set, and a guy finds out it's us, that the story's, and he's like, it was you guys? Steve, you got to tell me that story. And Steve looks at me and says, Derek, you tell it. I like who I am way more when you tell the story. Because that's the thing with stories. Stories, sometimes we're trying to give historical fact. I've just given you a version of the story. I guarantee you there were 7 people in that meeting, in that room, and all 7 of us would tell a different story of what happened that day. Even Steve and I, who spent most of the day together, tell the story differently. Because we all have our perspective on it. And some of that is because the way we carry our stories tells people about who we are. The way I tell that story tells you some things about me and what I would do, and it tells you some things about my friend Steve and what he would do, and it shows some of who we are. And in doing that, it sets us, the guys who stole a car, up as the heroes of the story, and these people who didn't like us stealing it as the villains who are trying to get us in trouble for nothing. I'm sure they don't tell the story that way when they tell the story. So we get these stories in our Bible, and especially these early stories, and we have to try to figure out some things about them because we don't always understand them, and what we've tried to do with a bunch of them is to make them almost into children's fairy tales that are just, oh, well, you know, it looked bad, but there's a happy ending and everything's all sweet. This is a horror movie, this story. This is not a happy children's tale. I encourage people not to teach this story to children because I don't think they're ready for it. I don't think they're ready to process the things that you have to process with a story like this. So what do we know about this story? Here's what archaeologists can tell us that they feel like is surely a fact. At 2900 BCE, there was a flood. A flood in the eastern Crescent Valley area that totally covered it. And you can go online and look at maps that have what the world looked like during that flood. And that area is all completely covered. And if you lived in that area, which is where all of the people lived in our early Genesis stories, the whole world would be flooded. The world is a flat piece of land. It's not a marble in the sky. It's a flat piece of land with a dome over it, and everything that you can see all around is flooded. I don't take this as somebody who was taking proper measurements and giving us a historical fact like our archaeologists would today. When you read the story, it says the waters hit 23 feet high, and they covered all the mountains. Now, I grew up in Midland. 23 feet high would cover all the mountains. But the people in Colorado are going to be doing all right. So I don't think we want to take it as 100% factual. I think people are not trying to tell us the history, and they're not trying to tell us how the flood happened. What they're trying to tell us is why. Why did this happen? And this one's an interesting one because there's 3 stories from this flood. 2 of them are not in our Bible, and one of them is. And the one in our Bible was written last. The first one is about a guy named, and yes, I do have to read it, Atrahasis. And Atrahasis was there, and the high god and god of weather, Enlil, decided, I'm going to destroy humans. But the water god, Ea, wanted humans to escape, so he built a boat and put Atrahasis in it to save humanity. There's another story about Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, we know, actually was a person. In this telling of this part of the story, Gilgamesh is 2/3 a god and 1/3 a human. So I'm not sure they were going for full factual detail either. His friend Enkidu dies. He doesn't want to die. It didn't look fun to him, so he wants immortality. So he goes trying to find it, and he finds Utnapishtim, nice easy word to say after camp, Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim says, I can't tell you how to do it, because what happened was Ea decided to flood the world, but then Ea had second thoughts. So Ea told me to build a boat and how to build it and put animals on board, and we survived by the grace of Ea. And so I'm just going to live forever. So those 2 stories are out there, and they're also from the eastern side of the Fertile Crescent. And then we have our story with Noah. Now here's the interesting thing about it. We have this God who's wanting to kill them. Enlil, why does he want to kill off humanity? Because we're noisy. That's it. Those humans make a lot of noise, and it irritates me, so I'm just going to wipe them off the earth. That's the kind of God that they saw themselves having. And then we have the Israelites. And why does God want to wipe them off the earth? The God who created the world out of chaos and into order is saying this world has decided to go back to chaos. And all they want to do is commit violence against one another. And I regret that I made them to do that. It's interesting. God regrets something God has done. What does that tell us about God? You've got an interesting God here in this early part of Genesis. Our stories of God are about a God who walks with Adam and Eve in the garden, and a God who has regrets, and these don't always jibe with what we've set up in our minds, God being. And the way God interacts isn't always how God interacts in the stories that continue through our Bible. So it leads us asking questions about this story and what it's telling us about God. So, God sees that humans are bringing it back to chaos and decides, okay, let's start over. And then there's this interesting thing that happens in the story. It's like God decides to hit rewind. Because if we go into our Genesis story, we have the waters of that chaos are over the deep, and the Spirit of the Lord hovers over the water. And the Spirit of the Lord brings the land up out of the deep and separates the waters, and then puts a dome over the earth so that the waters above would not flood the land. In the Noah story, what we're told is God sends the waters, the springs of the deep are released, and the windows of the sky are opened for the water to flood in. It's a reverse picture of what we have in the beginning of Genesis. And so we have that happening, and we have these humans, and it makes a point of talking about how, two different times it talks about how every breath is being taken from them. The breath of God that has given us all life is being taken back. God is starting over. And so he starts over with Noah because he was a good and moral man. And don't want to spoil it, but he didn't stay good forever. Just like us. There's a few things in there. If you want to come on Wednesday night when I do Dan's Bible study, we're going to talk about the 7 pairs of clean animals and only 1 pair of unclean animals that are in there, because I've got a lot of curiosity about that. But when God closes the springs of the deep and the skies, and they come to rest, God tells them they can leave the ark. Noah builds the altar, and God smells the sweet smells of the sacrifice and says, be fertile and multiply and fill the earth. God's starting over. It's the same thing that was told to Adam. But then there's this part that God says, I will surely demand your blood for a human life. From every living thing I will demand it. Whoever sheds human blood, by human his blood will be shed. For in the divine image God made human beings. Why did God do this? Because the violence that humans commit against one another. Why does that bother God so much? Because God created us to be like God. When we are devaluing another human being we are devaluing the image of God every time and every way that we do that. We are devaluing the image of God. And that's what got God to have such regret. But God also regrets this very thing that God has just done. God decides God went too far. And so God makes the covenant that God will never do it again. And then, instead of a precious moment, God takes God's bow, God's weapon of violence, and hangs it up and says, "This is the sign that I won't kill you all ever again. I'm putting down my weapon." And sets down God's bow. Stories are interesting things. There's two ways that we get to know people. One is their actions, and the other is their stories. There's two ways we get to know God. One is God's actions, and the other is God's stories. But when we're going through these stories, all of these stories are the stories that helped us as people understand who God is. Who God is to us. Who God has been and what God has done. And how God has looked for better ways to handle it when we choose to hurt one another. When we share our stories with one another, when we have the vulnerability to share those stories, when we spend time with one another so that we get to know how we act, that's how we become bonded. That's how we know we want to be around each other more. That's how we know when people are in relationship with God and living out that relationship with God. Stories are important. Stories are vital to what we do. And how we see and how we tell stories tells people about who we are as the people of God. So, I hope this story has helped you in your journey with God. Let's pray. God, we are thankful. Thankful that you have told us and shown us that you have found a better way than bringing violence upon us, to help us to find a way not to act with violence against one another. And we're sorry for the times that we do, whether it's physical violence or whether it's just being harmful to others. And we pray with thanks that you have given us grace and mercy, and that you continue to find the best way for us to live in your love and for us to be able to love one another. It's through your Son, that best way.